Hi, welcome back to the basement. I'm Steve Lewis. Today we wrap up our look at Beach Boys recordings released in the year 1986. And once again, in these three cubicles, I've placed some of the new and notable recordings of 1986, this time concentrating on the later half of the year. These are albums you might have seen on display in a record store in December of '86 when 4th of July, a Rockin Celebration of America was released. Now, before we talk about this album, I think it's important that we first back up a little bit and talk about the big James Watt Beach Boy controversy of 1983. On July 4th of 1980 and 81, the Beach Boys had played to huge holiday crowds in free concerts on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. There were reportedly 500,000 in attendance in 1980, making it the biggest crowd the Beach Boys ever played to. The 1981 crowd was estimated at 400,000. In 1982, the Grassroots appeared instead of the Beach Boys. Somehow, the Grassroots are reported to have drawn 600,000, which is still, reportedly, the all-time largest audience for a one-act U.S. concert. When Ronald Reagan became president in 1981, he appointed James Watt as Secretary of the Interior. He was one of the administration's most controversial appointments, with Watt being widely perceived as hostile to conservationism and to environmental concerns. As Secretary of the Interior, Watt was also in charge of the National Park Service, which ran events on the National Mall. In comments on April 5, 1983, Watt criticized the hard rock music at 4th of July celebrations on the mall in the last 2 years, saying they had brought in the wrong element, citing drug and alcohol use. Instead, he was arranging for patriotic, family-based entertainment from the U.S. Army Blues Band and Las Vegas entertainer Wayne Newton. If anyone had asked, I'm sure Watt could not name the bands he was referring to, and even if he had, I doubt he would have known that there was any difference between the Beach Boys and the Grassroots, and Iron Maiden or the Dead Kennedys. He just wanted those damn hippies off his lawn. In any case, by April 7th, the comments had set off a storm of derision that Watt was so out of touch that he considered the Beach Boys and the Grassroots, apparently, to be hard rock and unsuitable for a patriotic celebration. Even if you had no interest whatsoever in the Beach Boys, it's unlikely at the time that you would have missed the headlines, "James Watt bans the Beach Boys." For once, the Beach Boys publicists were not asleep at the switch and quickly issued a statement saying they found Watt's characterization unbelievable and that, over their 20-year career, the group has participated in many events geared specifically to the very families Watt claims they turn away. The Grassroots also issued a statement saying they were highly insulted, but it was pretty much ignored as the media quickly made the controversy James Watt versus the Beach Boys. The general public seemed torn as to whether it was more ridiculous for Watt to ban groups like the Beach Boys or to invite Wayne Newton instead. The Reagan administration seized on the opportunity. A statement was issued that First Lady Nancy Reagan was a Beach Boy fan. President Reagan joked that he was assigning his special ambassador to the Mideast, Philip Habib, to settle the Jim Watt Beach Boys controversy. Vice President George Bush issued a statement saying, "They're my friends, and I like their music." This was probably true, at least in part, as the Beach Boys had played a fundraiser for Bush's presidential run in 1980. A short time later, Reagan publicly presented Watt with a statuette of a foot with a hole in it, representing Watt shooting himself in the foot with his comments. Undoubtedly, the Reagan administration was happy to have Watt in hot water over something so trivial and was grabbing a public-pleasing headline. The Reagans invited the Beach Boys to a fundraiser for the Special Olympics on the South Lawn of the White House on June 12, 1983. In his introduction, President Reagan said, "We were looking forward to seeing them on the 4th of July. I'm glad they got here earlier." Later that day, the group helped George Bush celebrate his 59th birthday at a party in his honor. On July 4th of '83, Wayne Newton went on as scheduled. He reportedly played about a dozen songs to a smallish crowd in pouring rain. On that day, the Beach Boys played the Boardwalk in Atlantic City to a reported crowd of 200,000. James Watt kept on courting controversy for the Reagan administration, finally resigning on November 8, 1983, after some off-the-cuff comments about the panel reviewing his oil leasing policies, which were over the top even by 1983 standards. The Beach Boys returned to the National Mall for free July 4th concerts in 1984 and 1985, embracing the event even more after the controversy and playing up their new self-proclaimed title, America's Band. 10 years earlier, the Watt controversy might have given the Beach Boys some counterculture cred. Now, the point was that it was laughable that the Beach Boys were in any way subversive or even relevant, and Watt was a fool for thinking that they might be. I think the controversy and the Beach Boys' reaction to it spoke to a larger trend in U.S. culture at the time, something we've touched on before and will again. By the 1980s, it was becoming hip to be square. The Vietnam War, Watergate, and the counterculture were largely seen as an aberration in American history that was now behind us. For many, the counterculture was over, and it was time to celebrate America. It was pretty evident during the Reagan years. You can see it in plenty of movies like Red Dawn and Rambo, showing Americans standing up to foreign threats. Even Rocky IV had America's Rocky beating an evil Russian boxer. By 1986, the charts were full of records about America. Some, like Born in the USA, were cautionary tales. Most, like ROCK in the USA and Living in America, weren't overtly political and celebrated pop culture Americana, but the USA was a hot topic. Under the circumstances, the Beach Boys' reaction wasn't that being thought of as subversive by a member of the establishment was any badge of honor. On the contrary, they seemed to have taken it as a cue to prove Watt wrong and show how wholesome, unthreatening, and American they really were. Eventually, at least some of the members began referring to themselves as America's Band, which, as I've said before, is something I always found off-putting and a little presumptuous. America has had a lot of great bands, and it seems a little arrogant to decide that you are America's Band, unless you happen to be the U.S. Marine Corps Marching Band or something like that. Anyway, I was glad when that moniker was dropped. Released in December 1986 was 4th of July, a Rockin Celebration of America, which is a collection of July 4th performances on Mike Love's Love Foundation label. According to the album insert, profits from the album were being donated to the Statue of Liberty Ellis Island Restoration Fund. On July 4th of 1985, the Beach Boys had participated in a Philadelphia concert before flying to Washington, D.C. for their appearance on the Mall. The liner notes on the album refer to these concerts, giving the impression that all the performances on the album are from those shows. However, a lot of them come from the 1984 show. In 1984 and 85, the concerts had become all-star affairs featuring a large number of performers and guest stars in addition to the Beach Boys, some of whom appear on the album. In 1984, the group and some of the guests played Washington, D.C. in the afternoon, then did another free concert in Miami later in the day. I believe the 1984 recordings here are all from Washington, but it's possible some are from Miami. A recording from 1984 back in the USSR by Ringo Starr with the Beach Boys kicks off side one and is a highlight of the album. Unsurprisingly, they don't mess with the Beatles arrangement too much, though the piano is more prominent here. Being in part a parody of the Beach Boys' sound, the song was a natural choice for them. Kind of ironically, Ringo gets to play drums on one of the few Beatles songs he didn't drum on originally. It's cool to hear Ringo performing with the Beach Boys. Naturally, the song rocks along nicely. It's a nice track to have. Also from 1984, you get one track each from bands that happen to be friends of the Beach Boys. Three Dog Night doing their 1971 #1 hit, Joy to the World, and America doing their 1975 #1, Sister Golden Hair. You also get Surfer Girl by the Beach Boys with Julio Iglesias. Like World Cup football, Julio Iglesias had been massively popular in parts of the world, yet virtually unknown in the U.S. The Beach Boys had recorded an appearance on his album 1100 Bel Air Place, which was designed to be his breakthrough into the U.S. market. The Beach Boys appeared on a cover of the Hollies' The Air That I Breathe. We'll talk more about that in a future episode. The album also paired him with other popular U.S. artists, Willie Nelson and Diana Ross. On July 4th, 1984, Iglesias had already had a #5 hit with Willie Nelson, To All the Girls I've Loved Before, which had peaked on May 19th, 1984. I always thought that picture sleeve was hilariously great. Considering the title of the song, I always thought they looked like the world's most unlikely pair of wingmen out for a night at the singles bars. Iglesias' album was released on August 10, 1984, and a follow-up single, his duet with Diana Ross, All of You, will reach number 19 for 2 weeks beginning September 1st, 1984. So Julio Iglesias was successfully breaking into the US market in the summer of '84, which I'm sure accounts for his appearances at the July 4th concerts. Though he did well in 1984, those 2 duets will end up being his only US top 40 hits. On the album, Iglesias duets with the Beach Boys not on the Hollies' Air That I Breathe, but on Surfer Girl. The Beach Boys take the first verse, then Mike Love shouts out his introduction of Julio Iglesias, who takes the stage for the second verse beginning with, "We could ride the surf together." As you can see, LaToya Jackson was also on stage. As far as I can tell, she was just there for Iglesias to sing to. I'll admit I really enjoy this performance. It's my favorite thing on the album. Iglesias, with his ultra-smooth, romantic, Spanish-inflected voice, sounds simultaneously out of place singing a surf song and perfectly suited to a romantic ballad. I love the way he warbles, "In my woody." It's beautiful and kind of hilarious. I can't help thinking that even if he was cruising in a woody, he'd be doing it in a tux with some champagne on ice in the passenger seat. It's a weird culture clash that works in a surprising and funny way. It's definitely charming. In addition to LaToya Jackson, appearing at the 1984 concerts and not heard on the album were Lynn Anderson, John Lodge and Justin Hayward of the Moody Blues, Idle Tears, the OJs, and Hank Williams Jr. On July 4th, 1985, the Beach Boys and many other artists appeared at a concert in Philadelphia in the afternoon before many of them went on to Washington for the free show on the Mall in the evening. At least 2 of the recordings on this album are from the Philadelphia show. There's Joe Ely doing Buddy Holly's Not Fade Away, which is listed as Fade Away on the album sleeve and label. Also from Philadelphia, based on their stage patter, comes the Oak Ridge Boys performing their 1981 number 5 hit, Elvira. The Oak Ridge Boys then joined the Beach Boys for Come Go With Me. Just like on the Beach Boys record, Al takes the lead. The Oak Ridge Boys basically join in on backing vocals. Appearing at the Philadelphia shows but not on the album were Robert Hazard, Joan Jett and the Blackhearts, Katrina and the Waves, the Neville Brothers, the Sons of the Beach, and Frank Stallone. The 3 remaining live tracks on the album seem to come from Washington 1985. One of them features the Beach Boys. The Four Tops do their 1966 hit, Wake Me, Shake Me, When It's Over, which is listed simply as Wake Me, Shake Me on the album sleeve and label. The Bellamy Brothers were best known for their 1976 number 1 hit, Let Your Love Flow, which is definitely the song you would expect to hear from them on this album. Instead, you get Old Hippie, which was their new single in the summer of '85. The song never made the Hot 100, but did go to number 2 on the country charts. Also appearing in Washington in 1985 were Joan Jett and the Blackhearts and Katrina and the Waves again, Christopher Cross, New Edition, Radiant, Southern Pacific, and Mr. T. According to Mike's stage announcements, a bunch of other performers took the stage for the near finale of Barbara Ann, which is credited to the Beach Boys, Jimmy Page, and friends. Among those friends is John Stamos, Joan Jett, and Christopher Cross, and I'm not sure who all else. Jeffrey Foskett handles the falsetto lead vocal. Brian plays a very 80s keytar. Jimmy Page adds some heavy and suitably Jimmy Page-esque guitar flourishes that sound great and does a short solo during the instrumental break before Bruce takes over on saxophone. For just a second or two there, it sounds like the kind of hard rock that had worried James Watt a couple of years earlier. The 4th of July concerts on the National Mall seem to have ended after 1985. It looks like they've just gotten too big and too expensive. They were tying up the city with massive traffic jams and leaving behind mountains of garbage. There were lawsuits, or at least threatened lawsuits, after the '85 show about who was going to pay for the cleanup, and it looks like the free concerts on the mall were just quietly dropped. As discussed in an earlier episode, in 1986, the Beach Boys spent part of July 4th participating in Liberty Weekend, celebrating the restoration and centennial of the Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor. By 1987, it looks like July 4th was pretty much just another day on the road for the group. not listed on the cover or on the album label, but billed with a hype sticker on the front cover of the album, was Mike Love's new song, Happy Birthday America, written by Gary Griffin and Ted Mather, which is actually the first track on side 2 of the album. It starts with a pseudo-live opening and goes into a slow ballad with the usual gated drums and what sounds like a Casio keyboard providing most of the instrumental backing. The arrangement sounds very cut rate, like something you'd find on a generic album of patriotic songs that you'd find in a 2 for $1 bin at a truck stop. The melody is pleasant enough. Some of it seems to borrow from the "She Makes Me Come Alive and Makes Me Want to Drive" part of Don't Worry Baby. I've said before that my least favorite subject for a Beach Boys song is patriotism, and this one lays it on thicker than any other. To me, it just sounds sanctimonious and chock full of every platitude that they can get to rhyme. Somehow I get the feeling that Gary Griffin and Ted Mather might have been thinking of this as a patriotic American version of John Lennon's Imagine, which is kind of ironic when you think about it. Thankfully, this is not a Beach Boys recording. It's credited to Mike Love and friends, and I'm not exactly sure who those friends were, but I think if they'd been real friends, they'd have talked him out of recording this. The song seems to have been a late addition to the album. A little printed flyer is enclosed giving the songwriting and copyright information, along with some other credits that had apparently been omitted from the record sleeve. It gives me the feeling that there might have been a significant delay in releasing the album. The hype sticker and the flyer make me think that the album covers had already been printed ahead of the record, and it's kind of odd that they're issuing a fundraiser for the restoration of the Statue of Liberty about 6 months after the 2-year major restoration had been completed. I doubt there were a whole lot of profits to contribute anyway. I'm not sure how this was distributed, but it definitely was not something you were going to find in your typical record store in 1986. Like 25 Years of Good Vibrations, I got my copy at Rockaway Records. If I hadn't been shopping at Rockaway, I doubt I would have even known this existed. I know it's pretty easy to find it on Discogs and eBay these days, but if anybody knows how this was originally distributed, or if you got a copy back in the day, please let me know how you got it or where this was available and any information additional that you might have about the album. That'll bring us to the end of talking about the Beach Boys released material in 1986. Next time, we'll begin winding up with the fourth quarter of the year in pop culture. There will be more about the Beach Boys in those episodes, including a couple of notable television appearances. Hope you'll join me for that. Meanwhile, I look forward to your comments on this. Please hit like if you don't mind, and please subscribe if you haven't. Have a great week, and we will see you next time. Thanks. Bye.